Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, July 27th, 2015, getting to the end of the month here, getting through summer into August and autumn. It's already starting to feel autumnal here in the mornings. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little program note, tomorrow our third hour guest will be Michael Everett from Fortress Survival. And looking at all the dire warnings we are hearing about the global economy coming from some of the top economists who used to say, hey, this is great, and now they're not. Maybe reviving the issue of survival and off-grid living, it's germane. It's time to basically get people to start thinking about what they're going to do when this huge machine we've been forced to be dependent on starts coming apart at the seams, which does seem rather imminent. Now, we've been talking over the last couple of months about indications that what the U.S. government did in Kiev in January of last year is being planned for Moscow. And we know that the Russian government has banned several of these non-governmental organizations which were involved in the Maidan protests to drive their legitimate government from office and put in the junta. USA being one of them, a bunch of others, and of course the U.S. is screaming, oh, you're against democracy, you won't let our people in to overthrow your government. And there was kind of an interesting little situation that showed up at this Kiev demonstration. And the demonstration was a solidarity action, okay, to this labor camp in the former Soviet Union. They're reaching back into history for things to complain about. And they were flying the Russian flag as a form of protest, trying to link Russia to all the bad things going on, saying that Russia needs a Russian Maidan, Putin needs to go to prison, and so forth and so on. So already we're seeing the beginnings of the propaganda run-up to try the Kiev gambit against Moscow. I don't know that it's going to happen for one very fundamental reason. This kind of tactic, covert overthrow and replacement of a government, worked in an age where the people of the overthrown country didn't realize that's what was going on, that the new government that was coming into power was being directed by a foreign government, meaning the United States of America. Well, that may have been true back in the 1950s and 1960s. True all the way since the end of World War II, where this has been the United States' primary means of projecting power, overthrowing other governments. But here in the 21st century, everyone knows that's what they're doing. And they recognize the signs and indicators, and they dig their heels in. And I'm looking at this story over here in Russia today, talking about how these efforts inside Russia to kick up discord and protest are basically thrashing around and not getting any traction because everyone understands this is all being pushed by the American neocons. And right now, Putin's approval rating among the Russian people is almost 90%. And I dare you to find any American politician anywhere near that right now. Now, speaking of polls, Israel over the last week was putting out this poll where the majority of the Israeli people favor a strike against Iran, which is easy for them to say because they're expecting the American sons and daughters to actually go do the work. It's always easy to say, I'm in favor of war as long as somebody else gets to fight it here. Polls here in the United States are showing a somewhat different image. Jews in America are supporting this Iran nuclear deal, and there's a very obvious break in age. The older Jewish population tends to still go with whatever Israel wants. The younger American Jews seem to be breaking away. And as a matter of fact, we're seeing these editorial comments about the collapse of American Jewish identity. Well, this is America. And if you're going to have an identity, it should be American. and you can have a fond, nostalgic feeling of warmth toward the old country, but you're not supposed to come here and subvert the new country for the benefit of the old country. And apparently more and more of the younger Jewish population, they're breaking away. And they're thinking for themselves, and that's a very, very good thing. There's another article over at Intifada Palestine showing that polls around the world are showing that the world's Jewish population are starting to feel that Israel is the biggest threat to their safety because of all the trouble they're kicking up. It's a comment we've made here on the show many, many times before. A lot of the world's Jewish people actually feel embarrassed by the government of Israel, much as most Americans are embarrassed by the government in Washington, D.C. And so Israel's claim that they are the voice and conscience of the world's Jewish population, no, they're not. The younger American Jews are distancing themselves. The world Jewish population, they're concerned that Israel is creating a situation that will bring them harm. And that's absolutely true. Now, another article coming out of Russia today talking about how the Iran deal is on track here. The United Nations has unanimously endorsed it. We're now hearing that the Israel's whores in the U.S. Congress are having trouble getting enough votes to defeat the Iran deal, and certainly do not have enough to override a presidential veto. And they're starting to look at this as the neocons in retreat. This is a major setback because Iran was one of the major policy pillars coming out of the Project for the New American Century. And it may not be a temporary setback. This could be a stunning defeat for the neocon, for the Project for the New American Century, for AIPAC, and certainly for Netanyahu, who has bet much of his political capital on his being able to extend his influence into the United States of America and derail this deal. Now, people are calling into C-SPAN on the Iran deal, and a lot of them are bringing up this point. Iran does not actually have nuclear weapons. If we're concerned about nuclear proliferation, it's time to talk about Israel's nuclear weapons, and C-SPAN keeps cutting them off. And they've cut off so many callers on this topic. It's becoming obvious. C-SPAN is getting orders. Do not allow the subject of Israel's nuclear arsenal to get out there. Too late, but it's happening. Another article supporting that same agenda over at 12160, Israel's nuclear weapons and the fact that they've never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is a forbidden topic in Washington, D.C. You will never mention that. It's politically incorrect to talk about Israel's proven, documented nuclear arsenal, how they tried to sell one to South Africa, possibly have sold nuclear weapons to who knows all else. No, we can't talk about that. It's always Iran. It's Saddam's nuclear weapons. Oh, well, he didn't have any, so let's talk about Iran's nuclear weapons. And it's just another reminder to the world that Washington, D.C. is foreign occupied territory. We're going to grab a phone call real quick. Johnny in Kansas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I've been getting some scuttlebutt in my networks about Queen Elizabeth II died last month. And because of the three recent court cases that went through the English courts, they've pretty well proven that the House of Windsor is unlawfully sitting on the throne.
Well, you know what's really funny is when they dug up the remains of King Richard III and they were doing DNA tests, they found out that somewhere between Richard's time and the present time, one of Her Highnesses got knocked up by somebody not her husband. So it's just a huge embarrassment. And maybe Queen Elizabeth is out there playing canasta with Francisco Franco over there in the Let's Not Admit That They've Died cafe or something. At this point, I don't really care. This is for the British subjects to decide if it's time to no longer have a royal family. We got to take a break for commercials. Johnny, sorry, got to cut you off. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And getting back to the war zones, emphasis on the plural here. The United States government has announced that it's going to sell Saudi Arabia 355 air-to-ground missiles, the AGM-154, worth about $180 million, presumably to use against the people of Yemen, who are being collectively punished for daring to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler. How dare you do that? Once you're conquered by the American empire, you stay conquered. Those are the rules we just made up, and you must obey. One of the Saudi Arabian airstrikes managed to kill 120 civilians in this U.S.-sponsored war in Yemen. And by the way, from the category of dubious honors, as reported over in Global Research, the United States holds the world record for the killing of innocent civilians in war zones. I'm sure over there in D.C., they're Dick Cheney standing up going, "We're number one! We're number one! We're number one!" Professor John McCurdy, who did the studies, Canadian philosopher, says the U.S. government is a gigantic mass murdering machine. And they're right. If you're not of use to the American empire, just get rid of you. Now, Secretary General of Lebanon's Hezbollah, Saeed Hassan Nasrallah, is saying where the U.S. and Israel have gone wrong is they recruited and trained and equipped and funded all of these terror groups that are now collectively called ISIS, and then they lost control of them, which, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense. You're basically grabbing people who are just used to going their own way. You're giving them weapons and say, go over and bother these people. And they go over and bother those people. Then they proceed to go back to doing what they want to do. That's always been the risk of using these terrorist groups as proxies for what is supposed to be a clandestine war, which is not clandestine. We know what's really going on. Remember, much of what we're calling ISIS in Iraq were trained and equipped by the United States to use against some other group. And then they all got together and said, hey, we could be our own country again without a U.S. government in Baghdad. It's a messed up foreign policy. Gee, I wonder who was Secretary of State when all of these bad decisions were being made. That ought to be worth looking into. I think at this point that's a valid question. Now, Turkey is being accused of shelling Kurdish fighters. And Turkey is saying, no, not us. We have no idea. We have no idea what's going on or who's doing it. But the latest word we're getting is that Turkey is agreeing to create an ISIS-free zone on the Syrian border. Now, what they're talking about here is a no-fly zone. And who's not going to be allowed to fly in it is going to be Syria. Because ISIS, if they have any airplanes at all, they're not a credible air force. This is about keeping Syrian warplanes away from the planned invasion route into Syria. Now, Turkey is calling for an emergency NATO meeting for the end of the week, at which point they will formally propose establishing a buffer zone and a no-fly zone over Syria. In other words, they're going to start carving it off piecemeal the way they did with Iraq. And we're not really at war with the people of Syria. You know, it's that evil ISIS, and wherever ISIS goes, war must follow. That's what ISIS was created for. It's a scarecrow. Go into a country they want to invade, but they can't find a pretext. They plant this little scarecrow that says, ISIS, I'm torturing kittens and all this other stuff. Come and get me. Oh, yeah, we got to go get ISIS. And they invade and take over the place. Then they take the scarecrow and put it in the next country. That's what ISIS is for. ISIS is a made-up excuse to declare war on countries that have not actually done anything to the United States of America other than to tell the U.S. to mind its own business and butt out of that nation's internal affairs. Now, the U.S. is already on board with this no-fly zone and buffer zone and out there declaring that the United States government backs Turkey's right to self-defense. They have an unquestionable right to self-defense. Of course, Iran doesn't, and Afghanistan didn't, and Yemen doesn't, and Libya doesn't, and Syria doesn't, and most certainly the Palestinians. They don't have a legitimate right to self-defense, but by golly, Turkey does. That's the policy coming out from the official White Horse souse at this point. Now, interestingly enough, over at the United Nations, their 54-nation Economic and Social Council adopted a resolution today that names the world's only violator of economic and social rights in the world. Majority of these 42 states, including all the EU members, condemned this one nation as a consistent violator of economic and social rights. If you're guessing it's Iran or Syria or Russia or Saudi Arabia, you haven't been paying attention, because it's Israel. This UN body voted Israel, the world's only violator of economic and social rights. Only Australia and the U.S. voted against the resolution. Honduras and Panama abstained, and 8 of the countries simply didn't bother to show up. That's what's going on. Now, over in Israel's government, they're still reacting to John Kerry's confrontational speech of last week, saying that, it's time for Israel to get out of the way of the deal with Iran, because it was never Israel's right to be there anyway. Israel's not part of the P5+1. Israel is a nuclear power. Israel will not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel will not allow IAEA inspections. And yet Israel's on the forefront, people standing up there and saying, Iran is bad, Iran is bad. And don't forget, back in 2003, Israel was out there saying, Iraq is bad, Iraq has nuclear weapons, go get them. So this has prompted a response from one of the Israeli ministers. It said, how dare you, no one has the authority to threaten Israel, harumph. Israel maintains they have a right to threaten Iran and all of their other neighbors every single day, but nobody has a right to threaten Israel. Israel has a right to exist, but the Palestinians do not. Israel has a right to nuclear weapons, but nobody else does. Israel has a right to demand money from the U.S. taxpayer, but nobody has a right to demand anything from Israel in return. Israel has a right to bribe and tell other governments what they should do, but no government has a right to interfere with Israel. It's that double standard that has always been Israel's downfall, of presuming to be somehow above international law. At the same time, they point the finger of blame at anybody else. They want somebody to go kill them on behalf of Israel. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I want to talk a little bit about the big stink about Jonathan Pollard. Now, for those of you who have been living in a monastery for the last several years, Jonathan Pollard is an American Jewish individual who sold out his country to the government of Israel. He was inside the U.S. government in a secure position, and he started taking documents and sold them to Israel. Now, a lot of material was transferred over, including critical information about the targeting by U.S. Strategic nuclear forces against the Soviet Union. The government of Israel took this information and traded it to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased immigration quotas for Russian Jews. Now, to give you an idea of the scale of the betrayal, had the U.S. and the Soviet Union gone to nuclear war at that point, the United States would have lost. Now, my parents' generation were forced to pony up $5 trillion, and that was back when trillion was really a lot of money, to build America's nuclear deterrent to keep us safe from the gosh darn commies. And Jonathan Pollard basically invalidated that deterrent for a few $100,000. And he was caught, he was arrested, he was sentenced to life in prison. And that's an important point, because a lot of the stories we're seeing in the corporate media arguing for his release all start out with, well, he was sentenced to 30 years. That is an absolute flat-out lie. He received a life sentence. Now, at 30 years, which is coming up end of this year, he's eligible for parole. But if he's paroled, he will not be allowed to leave the United States to go to Israel, where he will be welcomed and treated like a returning hero. I also saw another article saying, well, Pollard didn't really commit espionage because, after all, Israel's our friend, and they should have been getting this information anyway. Well, it's not your choice to make. The U.S. government, for whatever reason, had decided Israel was not entitled to information about how and where U.S. nuclear missiles were targeted in the Soviet Union, and Israel did not have an automatic right to it by virtue of whatever definition of friendship they're using. And so Pollard was committing espionage. He sold this information to Israel. It wasn't even on ideological grounds. He did it for the money. And his crime is just as great and should have been treated just as harshly as when the Rosenbergs gave the secret of the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. And yes, I know there's another third gentleman who was involved in that who seems to have walked away clean from that, so you can stop the emails. But what Pollard did was very, very serious. And the idea that the U.S. government is thinking about releasing him to placate Israel because Israel's upset over the Iran deal has shown to the world that the entire city of Washington, D.C. are down on their knees, davening to Tel Aviv, oh, please forgive us, mighty Israel, for going out and doing a deal that was in our best interest rather than yours. Please forgive us for not wanting to send more of our American sons and daughters to the conquest of Iran based on another fiction about weapons of mass destruction. Here, we'll give you back this man who betrayed his entire country for money. And we're seeing a lot of articles coming out where now all of a sudden the administration's backing off and saying, well, we don't know where this came from. But no, we're not considering a parole or a pardon. Because it's infuriating to anybody who works with classified information, anybody who understands what's going on with Israel and nuclear weapons, that Pollard was treated with kid gloves all along. And by the way, Israel has officially acknowledged that, yes, Jonathan Pollard was their spy. Or their agent, whatever euphemism they want to use. And he should not be pardoned, and he should not be paroled. He should be kept locked up with Bernie Madoff with the loot for the rest of his life. What he did endangered every living American, man, woman, and child, at a time when there was a real possibility that the Cold War could go hot. There were some near misses, remember? If you've ever seen the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick, that's actually based on a true incident where a malfunction almost triggered a nuclear exchange with Russia. And this was at the same time that Pollard was selling to Israel, and Israel was giving to the Soviet Union where American missiles were targeted. Because back then they couldn't just change the targeting through a computer terminal. They had to go out to the rocket, open a hatch, set some dials, and say, this is where it's going to come down. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. John in Illinois, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I didn't know if you know, there's a new meme going around, a new trending hashtag.
Yes.
It's cuckservative. Have you heard it?
Yes, I have. Somebody sent me that yesterday.
Now, waking up, okay, my alarm's going off, so I get on my news radio this morning, and the first thing I hear is that Mike Huckabee quote about the oven.
Yeah, I got that sent to me like 5,000 times last night, where everybody just said he's really gone over the top on this one.
Well, that's the definition of the conservative right there, was anybody who puts the interest of Israel above that of the United States. And it's amazing. This is such a lesson. I mean, I told you before, I was in a fundamental independent separated Baptist church, and then 9/11 happened, and then nobody in the church would look at the physics of the thing. They were just going along with George Bush going, kill Muslims, kill Muslims, kill Muslims. And I'm like, hang on a second here, you know. And but this is just a lesson in how history cycles itself, because it was a church state. It was guys like Noah Webster that wrote the ecclesiastical establishments of Europe that serve to support tyrannical governments are not the Christian religion, but abuses and corruptions of it.
You know, governments always like to use the religiously deranged people because they can be talked into anything, and it doesn't even have to make any sense. Remember those pictures we used to see both of Bush and Obama, where they were very carefully positioned in front of the seal of the president, so it looked like one of those religious icon paintings from the medieval era with the gold halo blurred around their head, and it was so heavy-handed and obvious. A lot of people laughed and they stopped doing it, but that's literally what they're doing. They see the people who are caught up in religion as ready to do, if they can just come up with a convincing argument that says God says you should do this, they've got an automatic large percentage of participation.
Yeah, I mean the church serves a purpose to keep the public docile in fear of, like you say, the, playmate in the sky. I mean, I believe in a creator, but, but
George Bush actually said this is a holy crusade. George Bush, when he launched this, back in 2000, this is a holy crusade. We Christians are going to go out and we're going to slap some Muslim butt.
Well, and now what you have this Zionist cabal of these people that rewrote the Christian religion, putting a loaded gun to the American Christian's head, going, you're either with us or against us. That's what it is. Whatever's good for Israel is good for the United States. Now we're going to have this war. Iran's going to screw up. We're going to tell you screwed up, and we're just going to keep blowing up the Middle East, whether you like it or not. Now, are you with us or not?
Well, obviously not as many people are with them because they've stumbled rather badly, and Israel's government and Netanyahu especially have bet so much political capital on derailing the Iran deal, and if they can't do it, they're going to suffer domestically. My concern is that if Netanyahu can't get the U.S. Congress to do his bidding and kill this deal, that Israel may haul off and attack Iran. In fact, they just launched this gigantic mobilization emergency drill where everybody who's active service or reserves in Israel are being called up for exercises to make sure they're ready to go to war. And so they're getting ready to uncork on somebody somewhere. At this point. John, I hate to cut you off, but I need to let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show now. Getting on back to the issue where Israel is out there saying, you didn't do the Iran deal the way we wanted, so we demand that you make us happy by giving us Jonathan Pollard and a 50% increase in your constant financial military support to us. Harumph, harumph, harumph. Polls are showing that the overwhelming majority of the American people do not think Israel deserves a dime in any kind of compensation or placation because the U.S. government did not do what the government of Israel wanted them to do. Most Americans right now are thinking Israel should just go pound sand and shut the heck up. Now, there are two issues here. First of all, if you believe Israel's story about World War II, then you have to realize that the American people, including my family, sacrificed much blood and treasure to stop the Nazis from completing whatever it is Israel says the Nazis were trying to do. So why are we on the hook financially to Israel? Shouldn't Israel be grateful to us? Shouldn't Israel be compensating the families of all those American servicemen? I mean, after all, they lost their principal breadwinner. Israel doesn't act like it's got anything to be grateful for, which is one of the major reasons why that Orthodox story is crumbling. Israel doesn't behave like it's got any reason to think that they were saved from this horrible fate. Second, every penny of U.S. financial aid sent to Israel is illegal under United States law, under both the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act, both of which say the U.S. government cannot give any of your tax money to any nation that has nuclear weapons technology, that refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and refuses IAEA inspections. The government in Washington, D.C. has been stealing from you, the American people, to give to their masters in Tel Aviv in violation of United States law. Now, Israel is very unhappy over the fact that they didn't get the Iran deal. They're very unhappy over the fact that that UN body just voted them as the economic and social rights violator of the planet. So Israel reacts the way Israel's always reacted. They throw a tantrum. Yesterday morning, the Israeli police attacked the Al-Aqsa Mosque. 10 Palestinians were injured. No explanation. They just went into the mosque and started tearing up the place. And they're trying, and apparently there were a bunch of the illegal Israeli settlers were trying to break in. Apparently some children got attacked. And we know what Israel is doing. Israel is doing this and hoping it will not make the American corporate media, which it hasn't, so that when the Palestinians fight back, Israel can say, oh, look, the Palestinians are attacking us. They're at fault. They're initiating, they started all of this thing. No, Israel started it. Israel always starts it. Provokes a response and then claims the response is the initiating. It has nothing to do with what we did at Al-Aqsa Mosque, or nothing to do with our violating the ceasefire and bombing Hamas officials. That's a separate issue. What matters is the Palestinians are angry with us and we have a right to go and kill them. Now, as I mentioned to that caller a little while ago, this is being reported in Russia today. Israel has launched large-scale military drills, ostensibly to test the IDF's readiness to mass and deploy the largest possible force in the shortest possible time. Hundreds of thousands of reserve soldiers have been called up. And basically, an IDF source told the newspaper this is one of the largest call-ups they've had. They want to ensure the system is well-oiled and working. In other words, Israel is ramping up to stage an attack on somebody. Could be Iran. Remember, Netanyahu said that he was going to attack Iran if the Iran deal went through. Could be Lebanon. They still want that Litani River. Could be into Syria. And to show you how powerful the propaganda is getting, there's a story that came out of DW.com where apparently at Frankfurt's Goethe University, they are establishing a chair for Holocaust studies. There'll be a full professorship devoted to this subject in Germany, study of the Holocaust starting in 2017. It's all funded. My understanding is the Holocaust professor will share office space with the global warming chair and the chairs of alchemy and phlogiston chemistry. Look those up if you don't get the joke. Now, down in Ukraine, after all the Sturm und Drang of a coup d'etat that drove Ukraine's government out because they didn't want to join with the European Union, wanted to merge with Russia, so we overthrow the government, we start a civil war, we kill hundreds of thousands of people and spend a huge amount of money, destroy the quality of life in Ukraine because, by golly, they have to be part of the European Union. And now, Ukraine's foreign minister is saying it might not be possible for Ukraine to join the European Union because, among other things, the huge amount of debt they have piled up fighting this war. Kiev is required to wait 5 years before they can apply for membership. All that bloodshed, all that money, all that death, and they're not going to get Ukraine into the European Union the way they hoped. Like I said, I want to know who at the Department of State was thinking up this stuff that it was going to work. Somebody, I don't know, brain damage, maybe. Makes sense here. The Ukrainian news service is confirming that the standard of living for the entire country is plummeting, their words. There are areas of severe food insecurity. Even in the non-rebelling parts of western Ukraine, there's concern of people starving to death. Wherever the U.S. coup d'etats go, starvation, privation, suffering follow. Now, the deal with the Greek economy, or the bailout, is not a done deal just yet. Greece's parliament has voted through all these various bills. We're now seeing foot dragging on the part of the European Union. The IMF is saying the plan can't actually work anyway. And a lot of people are saying Greece will be leaving the European Union by next year anyway. And apparently the story has now come out that Greece, and we reported that there were indications of doing this, Greece was working on a plan to restore and reissue the drachma. And there's speculation that if Syriza fragments, that there will be enough of the anti-austerity politicians left to form a whole new coalition to give austerity and the bankers the heave-ho. This is not settled. It is not done. By the way, Puerto Rico is in default on some of their bond issues. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about the derivatives. Total exposure to derivatives around the globe right now is $1.5 quadrillion. There isn't that much money in existence. And that is the real problem with all of this private central banking fiat currency. The debts run up based on money that never existed to begin with. Derivatives are weapons of mass economic destruction. They can make you instantly wealthy overnight during a good economy, and they will turn on you like a viper when the economy goes the other way. It's a force multiplier. 10 times as good, 10 times as bad. Now, Beppe Grillo, former comedian, now politician, is once again out there saying the only way that the European Union will survive is to kick out the private central bankers, nationalize all banking, have a public currency operated as a public utility, and throw off the anti-democratic straitjacket of the Eurozone. And he's absolutely right. These private central banks were never started for the benefit of the people of a nation or the nation itself. They are started, they are put into existence to extract the wealth created by the labor of the people and put it in the pockets of the bankers, by hook or by crook, emphasis on the crook. All right, we're coming up here on our top of the hour news break. When we come back to hour 2, more about the economy, more about human-caused global warming, a bunch of other stuff. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. We're talking about the economy, and we're seeing all kinds of indicators where even the former most loyal acolytes to the religion called private central banking are backing off and saying, this is coming apart. The central banks are leveraged at levels greater than they were, than Lehman Brothers. When it imploded, the Fed is leveraged 78-1. The ECB is leveraged 26-1. Lehman Brothers was only leveraged at 3, and they fell apart. And here's where it gets really, really alarming. There's a story over in the German media, not repeated here in the United States, where the Bank for International Settlements has acknowledged in its annual report that what they are doing is failing, that the printing presses and the zeros in the computers isn't working. Duh! Because every time they print up new paper notes or type more numbers into a computer, it's another loan at interest. That is the fatal design flaw in the entire model of private central banking. The system creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, and then uses that debt trap to enslave humanity to their will. Now, what's really interesting in this article in the German media, they're admitting all the trillions of instantly created money that was showered all over brokerage firms so they could buy up stocks and make it look like things were working. It's not actually produced any growth in the real economy. No new businesses, no new jobs, no new products, no new industries. It's all been a paper shuffle to make the stock markets look good. And they're admitting central banks cannot save the economy. And then here's the kicker. The Bank for International Settlements is saying the governments of the world must now resolve the crisis. Talk about arrogance! The private central bankers are now admitting that this 11th marble idea didn't work. It screwed the world up, but it's up to government to step in and fix everything. Now, from the point of view of the private central bankers, I'm sure they're thinking this is the government looting the people to balance the books. More bail-ins, TARP, whatever it takes here. I think from my point of view, and probably yours as well, government cleaning up this mess means shutting down all the private central banks, tossing the bankers in prison for the monumental fraudsters they have been for the last 3.5 centuries, and go back to the model of a public currency handled as a public utility. The Federal Reserve has just issued a warning to the 8 largest U.S. banks to increase their capital reserves suggesting that they're looking at a period of increased volatility. And they say they're doing it to reduce the chances that we'll have to ask for more taxpayer bailouts, because they know those are very unpopular, especially going into an election year. They're not ruling them out, but they're saying, let's at least act like we're not depending on that. China stock market took a major hit, biggest one-day loss in the last 8 years. Shanghai Composite dropped 8.5%. The ripple effect went all around the globe yesterday, and the Dow closed 127, 128 down, and it's been in decline for an entire week now. And I'm sure people are getting very, very nervous about what's going on. It's not going to take much to start a panic when they realize it's all paper, it's all overvalued. And the problem with an overvalued market is when the panic hits, the first ones out will get their money back, and everybody else is going to be left with a impressive-looking number on the bottom of their last brokerage report. And that's all it will be, an impressive-looking number on a piece of paper. Now, one of the pieces of propaganda the U.S. government has been wagging at us to convince us the economy is just great if you'll just go out and spend more and work longer hours and die sooner is how there has been a growth in income across the board. Now, this growth in income is barely keeping up with the rate of inflation, so it's already a push. But more and more people are being forced to use their credit cards for emergencies, unexpected, and the skyrocketing credit card debt more than overcomes the supposed illusion of income growth. We're looking at something like almost just shy of $1 trillion on credit card debt. And those credit cards are charging anywhere up to 20% annual interest. Get a better deal from some of the loan sharks down by the harbor. All right, so let's talk about the political scene here. Donald Trump is leading in the GOP polls even after the controversial remarks. And I love the way they phrased it in this article that came out of Inquisitor.com. Despite the controversial comments Trump has made throughout his campaign, the billionaire is leading the GOP polls. It's not despite, it's because of. Because Trump is out there talking about real problems and issues. He's not hiding behind the politically correct manufactured fringe issues that everybody else is. That's why they hate him. Even Trump is out there saying that his high poll numbers are not about himself personally, but just Republicans being tired of politics as usual in Washington, D.C., and Trump is right. We are all sick and tired of politics as usual. Now, the GOP has made a major strategic blunder, thinking that John McCain's star power would be an effective weapon to silence Trump. And it probably would have worked maybe 20, 30 years ago, but in the age of the Internet, most people know the truth, that John Songbird McCain's record of heroics is as phony as Saddam's nuclear weapons. He got charged with crimes when he was released from North Vietnam because he'd been cooperating with him. He actually got a pardon from Richard Nixon. A lot of people don't know that. And by the way, we posted a link over to the Federal Elections Commission website to the page for Donald Trump to hammer home a point. Trump has paid all the fees and filled out all the paperwork to be a Republican presidential candidate. He is on an equal footing with all the other candidates, and it doesn't matter how much the corporate media tries to pretend otherwise, how the GOP leadership tries to claim he's not really a Republican candidate. Yeah, he is. He's done the paperwork. Now, what's really amazing is this latest dodge coming out of the GOP leadership, where they're out there saying, well, we don't care if Trump is leading in the polls. Our best bet against Hillary is our boy, Jeb Bush. And they're trying to come up with this little tactic of trying to get all the GOP candidates to take a vow or sign a pledge or a contract that they will not run as third party. Obviously, that's targeted on Trump, because if Trump is stupid enough to sign such a document or take such a vow, then they can kick him out and not worry about him coming back as a third-party candidate. And the machinations they are going through to get rid of this upstart are obvious to everybody, And that is why GOP voters are sick and tired of what the GOP leadership is doing. They remember 2008 and 2012 when the GOP leadership literally stole the nomination away from the Republican voters' favorite candidate, Ron Paul. They haven't forgotten in just 4 years, and they can see it being done again, and they're furious. And they have a right to be. They ought to be. So I hope Trump is wearing his Kevlar undies because the Ron Paul treatment isn't working, and all that's left to keep him from being a threat to the insider's little party is the Robert Kennedy option. And I would not rule that out. So, Don, be careful. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over on the Democratic side, they're not much happier than the GOP leadership right now. They have hitched their wagon to Hillary Rodham Clinton. They've made it very clear that just as the GOP has preordained Jeb Bush to be their candidate in 2016, no matter what those pesky GOP voters want, the Democrats have anointed Queen Hillary to be their candidate, and they're in trouble. Her numbers are going down, especially in those critical swing states. There's a major implosion going on, and it has to do with over that issue about trustworthiness and honesty. And Hillary is carrying more baggage along those lines than Kim Kardashian on a photo shoot. And it's coming back to haunt her. Because again, in the age of the internet, politicians cannot leave their histories behind. Hillary launched her career trying to pretend she was just an ordinary person, that she's not insanely wealthy. You know, she's out there saying, I'm poor, Bill is poor, Chelsea's poor, the upstairs maid is poor, the chauffeur is poor, my lawyer's poor, my personal secretary is poor. We're all poor, 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 poor. And of course it didn't work. And what must be frustrating for Hillary's campaign is there isn't a single issue they can go after. Like back in the days of Bill Clinton's presidency where, you know, the scandals were one at a time. Paula Jones, Jennifer Flowers, and they would go after the bimbo squads. Hillary's entire history is on display all over the net. Back to her firing from the Watergate Committee for lying and unethical behavior. The cattle futures trades, Charlie Tree, John Huang, posing in front of the White House Christmas tree with a known cocaine smuggler and Clinton donor. Benghazi, the email server scandal, being caught lying about all this stuff. It's not going to go away. And let's not forget Vince Foster. And so her numbers aren't good. The Democrats are raising on a busted flush. They're hoisting with their own petard. Bernie Sanders is coming on strong. If Trump does get the GOP nomination over the wishes of the GOP leadership, because that's what the GOP voters are saying in all the polls. They want Trump. They don't want Bush. They don't want these other people. They want Trump to continue. And the GOP leadership, especially after the betrayals in 2008 and 2012, trying to dump a popular candidate in favor of one of the pre-approved good old boys, could be the end of the party as a serious, serious force in this country. So if Trump gets the GOP nomination, there's no way Hillary can win. If Trump gets the nomination, I would not rule out seeing a sudden move to impeach Barack Obama in order to put Joe Biden in the White House and then run him as the incumbent against Trump in 2016. That's about the only option they've got left short of outside the law and assassination. Now, bowing to public pressure, Hillary Clinton has agreed to a public testimonial over Benghazi, at which point she'll repeat, what difference does it make? Shoulda, coulda, woulda. It's somebody else's fault. I was not in the loop. The usual stuff that she says. What is significant about this is her bowing to public pressure to testify publicly shows that she's in catch-up mode. She's lost the initiative. She and her campaign are having to deal. They're having to react to what's going on around her. And that, too, is another sign the campaign is already in trouble, and we haven't even gotten into 2016 proper. Now, Mike Huckabee has grabbed himself a lot of ink and a lot of airtime over comments he made over the weekend about how this new deal with Iran is opening the doors to the ovens. He's basically out there implying that Iran is the new Nazi Germany, that this deal for a nuclear-free Iran is opening up the ovens, and there's going to be a new Holocaust. And even the Jewish community was out there saying, "Are you kidding us? Are you kidding us?" And it is absurd. And Obama has basically slammed Huckabee for trying to exploit the Holocaust in criticizing the Iran deal. And Obama is right. Huckabee is engaging in blatant pandering to Israel of the worst, most pathetic sort. Huckabee is currently polling at 7% in the GOP polls. He's not even in the same time zone with being a serious contender. And he probably thought some manufactured controversy might get him more media attention, which it certainly has, and derail Trump, which it most certainly has not. Huckabee, ever since he announced, has been clearly engaged in a contest with Hillary Clinton over who can kiss Israel's butt harder and deeper and wetter. And at the moment, I guess he's in the lead. Okay, and here's what's really interesting. Back in 2008, when Huckabee was running, he went the exact opposite route. Back in 2008, it was Huckabee that was saying engagement, not confrontation. We can use sanctions. We'll come up with a deal that's acceptable. And now that Obama has implemented Mike Huckabee's 2008 suggestion, Mike Huckabee is flipping to the other side. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that. We've got to go to war against Iran because that's what Israel wants, or there's going to be a new Holocaust. Harumph, 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 harumph. Now, Lindsey Graham's campaign is also not doing very well, so not to worry. He's got Senator John McCain is going to campaign on behalf of Lindsey Graham in New Hampshire this next week. And I hope that Songbird McCain is greeted by signs asking about the USS Liberty cover-up and his own wet start on the USS Forrestal. And Lindsey Graham may find that he's hoisting with his own petard because McCain's star power is on the wane. Because in the age of the Internet, we understand that McCain's heroism is a manufactured fraud, no more real than Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons. McCain has angered a lot of people, and all those people are coming back. They're going public about what really happened in Hanoi, what really happened on the Forrestal, how McCain was at the center of the cover-up of the fact that there were surviving POWs held by Vietnam because the U.S. government didn't want to actually pay the reparations they'd agreed to. Just, we'll save money by letting them keep the POWs. And McCain was at the heart of that. And the Keating Five, let's not forget the Keating Five, about what's going on. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently Ted Cruz just scored some major campaign support from some Texas fracking companies to the tune of $15 million. And he's out there, yes, fracking is good, fracking is wonderful, we're going to put fracking wells in every pot in America. And it's just another reminder that they're all sellouts, except for Trump. He's got his own money. He doesn't need to sell out to anybody. He'll pay them lip service like every other politician. But there's a difference between acknowledging and being owned by. And I think that's an important distinction to keep in mind. By the way, what's going on with Ted Cruz running? He was born in Canada. He's not a natural-born American citizen. And his supporters are out there trying to say, well, natural born has never been legally defined, therefore we're going to tell you that any place on earth is natural born. No, any place on earth is born. And what's really amazing, watching all the machinations they're going through to get this gentleman born in Canada to be eligible for president, these are the same people who went after Barack Obama's birth certificate, hammer and tong, trying to claim that he wasn't born in the United States of America. It's bad for Obama. It's okay for Ted Cruz. And by the way, because this is all of a sudden an issue again about the birth certificate, yes, the birth certificate is a fake. What it covers up is not where Obama was born, because he was born here in Hawaii. That I've confirmed independently. What the birth certificate covers up is who his real biological father is. And that's one Frank Marshall Davis. Now, back in the 1960s, there were a lot of love childs around. Had the summer of love, followed by the autumn of gonorrhea. And it was normal for women who had a child, when they found somebody to marry them, rather than go through the whole legal rigmarole of an adoption, they would simply get a new birth certificate made up to change the baby's last name. Common practice, happened everywhere. Okay, and that is all there is behind the Obama birth certificate. But there is no question Ted Cruz was not born in the United States of America. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. Glenn in Pennsylvania, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I guess the distinction there would be between natural born and naturalized. And that's, they play word games. The word weasels love to play with words.
Well, their entire argument is that because the courts have not defined what natural born really means, we're not allowed to decide for ourselves. And that's utterly absurd. We know what natural born means. In the context of the Constitution, it means somebody born in this country. And that requirement...
Right, exactly.
That requirement was put in there because the Founding Fathers had looked over the history of Europe for the previous centuries, where you had rulers of countries who were not born there, couldn't even speak the language, because the royal families were just trading their kids back and forth with each other for political gain. And it wound up with very bad government as a general result. And that was one of the reasons the natural born requirement was put into the Constitution. They wanted Americans to be president of America, not Canadians, not Kenyans, not any of these others. And Ted Cruz does not qualify to run as President of the United States of America. The fact that the party machine is still pushing him is just another reminder of how corrupt they all are.
Right. And like when a military man and his wife are stationed abroad and the child's born, it's still natural born.
By convention, if they're born like on a U.S. territory, U.S. military base, it's considered U.S. sovereign soil, and that does qualify. That's how McCain got in, because he was actually born down in Panama.
That's my point, yeah.
Yeah, he was born down in Panama. But Canada is not U.S. territory.
Exactly. About Trump, I wanted to point out, if he continues to run as a Republican and they don't oust him and he's leading broadly in the polls, they can't very well exclude him from the debates. But if
they're working on it. They're working on it, yeah. And this nonsense about trying to get all the Republican candidates to take a vow or sign a contract that they won't run third party, Trump has to know that's aimed at him. And so they're trying to create a situation where they can basically crush him down and not have him return as a third party candidate, which would be a threat not only to the GOP, but to the two-party system as a whole. They're really scared of this guy. And that's the reason why, as of right now, until something better comes along, I'm in Trump's camp. And he's not perfect, but I think it comes down to the fact he's willing to talk about real issues. He's not owned by anybody. And like I said, keep in mind that difference between paying somebody lip service and acknowledging them politically and being owned by them. And I get a lot of emails from people saying, oh, you can't go with Trump. He said nice things about Israel. Well, they all say nice things about Israel. But Israel doesn't own Donald Trump the way it owns, Mike Huckabee and Hillary Rodham Clinton. So, right now he is a refreshing breath in this stagnant cesspool of politics called Washington, D.C., and I don't think they're going to let him get to the White House. They're going to pull whatever dirty tricks it takes, and I feel bad for Donald Trump, but, as of right now, he is the least objectionable of everybody who's angled at the White House.
I just hope Wesley Clark doesn't succeed in having him interned. You're aware of Wesley Clark saying that disloyal Americans should be interned.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I thought Clark was talking about me.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to say one other thing about the fracking thing. I'm beginning to suspect that the fracking thing is about ruining the groundwater. Now that they know about primary water deep in the Earth's crust, I wonder if it's about ruining groundwater sources so that companies like Nestle, who thinks water should be a commercial paid-for commodity, can they say, oh, well, your municipality can no longer draw from the aquifer because it's polluted. So now we're going to sink some really deep wells down into the primary water, kind of like Muammar Gaddafi did, and we'll use primary water from deep within the earth, and then you can pay us for it.
Well, I'm sure Nestle and these other water companies are taking advantage of that, but they're not drilling deep wells. They're basically licensing those same aquifers, especially out in California. Yeah. It's seriously exacerbated their drought condition because fracking has contaminated two of the largest freshwater aquifers they've got. Nestle has an expired permit on one of the others, and it's all basically politics and money-making. I think the reason fracking was given the green light is the same reason that these deep wells in the Gulf of Mexico were given the green light. The U.S. has been planning for war in the Middle East. They wanted to have alternative sources of gas and oil to cover the shortfall from turning the Middle East into a bloodbath, and the technologies really weren't able to deliver. We had the huge blowout on the Deepwater Horizon, and we've had other blowouts less spectacular because the technology can't handle those pressures. And fracking was just all about we're going to just get all this oil and gas out of the ground. They can't deliver. The fracking is contaminating everything. It's another failed policy move by Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and we haven't seen guys like T. Boone Pickens play their hands yet. They're playing it close to the vest and have all these huge holdings. So when the big water guys are sitting on their assets at the moment, it'll be interesting to see how they play their cards later in the game.
Well, I got to tell you, all somebody needs to do is come up with very cheap, large-scale water desalination and get fresh water right out of the ocean. And all of these Nestle companies and everything, they're going to be in serious, serious trouble.
Exactly.
Okay.
Energy intensive at the moment, though.
It is, but we're working on that idea. All right?
Okay, very good.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. We got another caller waiting on the line, but I'm going to have to ask you to hold for 4 minutes for our commercial break, and we'll be back to talk with you after these few words from our sponsors in 5, 4, 3, 2. Cue the music. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the latest we're getting from the Hillary Clinton campaign, it sort of harkens back to the old election rhetoric about a car in every driveway and a chicken in every pot here, because Hillary's campaign is now saying that if we all pretend to vote for her for president, she will put solar panels on every American's roof. Which, of course, we know she's not going to do that, because of how much it would cost and how much it would alienate the large energy conglomerates and corporations and the banks that fund them, who are generously funding her campaign. It's just she's out there trying to say whatever she needs to say to get elected, rather than talking about what's really going on. We're going to grab a phone call. Mark in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Mike, I was driving earlier, through the Dallas area.
Yep.
And I heard a guy by the name of Mark Davis. And he was talking about Trump. And he said he'd have to see if Trump becomes president, whether he'd have the quote-unquote cojones to send at least 50,000 more American troops into Iraq. And then I heard some other clown over the weekend. I think the name is Gary Bauer and Rose. This guy, Bauer, is one of the founders of the Project for New American Century.
Mm-hmm.
And these two jerks were talking about, all kinds of how America should interfere here and there, and our enemies here and there. But I mentioned Putin. So I actually called, and I managed on my Bluetooth, and I actually managed to get through. And I told them, well, you're talking about Putin, and they were kind of indicating that, a lot of this stuff was anti-Semitic about, Iran and everything like that. And, people against Israel, they kind of being anti-Semitic and all that. So I says, you're talking all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is that you're, by going against Putin and defending and going with the Ukraine, you're actually supporting actual Nazis, because that's what the right sector is. These are not only neo-Nazis, these are real Nazis. So you know what this answer this clown gave before he just hung up the phone? He says, do you know the actual definition of a Nazi is National Socialist? And, he didn't really give an answer. He just said, I know the National Socialists, I know, and they were socialists, that's all. So what? I don't care what you call them. The fact of the matter is they were genocidal, and the Ukraine and the right sector of the Ukraine is basically neo-Nazis. So these people are such hypocrites, Mike, it's unbelievable. And then nobody wants to talk about this Monsanto bill that they passed. This is horrible.
Okay, well, let's stop hopping here. I want to respond to what you just said here. What's going on right now, and we're seeing it in the way they tried to use McCain against Trump, in the interviews you're talking about, is our political class have, through generations and generations, become used to this idea of crafting this alternate reality that everybody acts like they believe in it, and everything has to be for that, and all of the policy is basically justified in terms of this mass hallucination called the image of America. But we've now reached a stage out here in the real world where, because of the internet, independent media, we're beginning to understand that we cannot evaluate what's going on based on its labeling. And more people are saying, I don't care if Israel calls itself the perpetual victim, who is the aggressor, who is, being aggressed upon. And more people, and this is a good thing, more and more people are looking at the actions of these groups, whether it's in Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Kiev, Yemen, wherever. And people are deciding for themselves who's the aggressor, who's the victim, who's right, who's wrong. And the more that we see these corporate media people continue to try and portray the world in terms relative to this relic of the 1950s image of America, the more they're going to be thrashing around, and they're going to be getting more phone calls from people saying, look, you guys are talking nonsense. Earlier in the show, we were talking about how C-SPAN is hanging up on anybody calling in about the Iran deal who mentions the fact that Israel does have nuclear weapons. It's been confirmed over and over and over again. Israel will not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel will not allow inspections. Why aren't we concerned about them? And you get click from C-SPAN, because C-SPAN is part of this religion that says Israel is good and Iran is bad, and we're the wonders of the age, and all these other countries should do what we tell them to. And I can imagine a lot of them are having a crisis of faith right now, and because people tend to define their identities in terms of what they believe in, they're going to react like you attacked them personally, which sounds to me like what you ran into from these people from the Project for the New American Century.
Yeah, well, their names are Bauer and Rose. It's this guy, Gary Bauer, I think he was one of the heads of it. This guy Rose, he's just some other guy. He's on with it. That was an XM, Mm-hmm. But this other guy, Dave, wanted to send 50,000 more troops into Iraq. I mean, but he wouldn't grab a gun and go there himself,
No, of course not. That's for the cattle to have to do. But what's really interesting is if they try and put Trump on the spot by saying, would you send another 50,000 troops in there? From their point of view, being pro-war, that's a bad thing. But the vast majority of the American people, we're sick and tired of war. We don't want a candidate who says, I'm going to start another war my first day in office, which we've already heard from Hillary, and we've already heard from Jeb Bush,
Walker.
And Walker, they're all at I will start a new war. Okay, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, get on out of here. We want to vote for somebody who's going to be worried about making this country work again. Not pleasing yeah.
Hello? Talk about Walker, I don't know if you know that Walker, he took this anti-union stand when he first came into power.
Yes.
But the one union that he wouldn't subject that to were the people that should never even have a union, because they use it only to cover up crimes and extort the public, and that's the police union. He didn't do anything with them. So, That's another thing. People should understand that about Walker.
Well, Walker was using the police force for his own private enforcement unit during that whole confrontation with the public workers. And frankly, the fact that Scott Walker did that, dumped the blame for the pension problems on the workers rather than on Wall Street where it belonged, is why I would never vote for Walker, at all.
No. And the other thing is, as far as, like I said, about the Dark Act, this is disgusting what they did. And you know what? Some of the best Republicans that I thought were good guys, like this guy, North Carolina, Mark Meadows, that guy, not Alex Jones, another Jones from North Carolina, who's like people used to think he was the new Ron Paul, and even Gomer in Texas. They all voted along with this horror. I mean, we're just being sold out on every level. I mean,
Yeah, we are, and it's on full display to the world. I'm seeing a lot of articles in the foreign press saying it's very obvious. Washington, D.C. has become totally corrupted from top to bottom, and they talk about its constant obeisance to Tel Aviv as one example, the sellout for GMO, the sellout for fracking, and all of that. Yes, Washington, D.C. has a giant for sale sign out in front of it, and the more money you've got, the more you can get passed in your favor. And for ordinary people, we just don't count anymore.
I don't know how long this country can go like this. I mean, before the people have rebelled. I mean, this is terrible. I mean, it's just, it seems to be no hope anymore that, politically.
Well, I disagree. Now, again, I'm not encouraging a violent rebellion, but I think we all need to recognize the system is tearing itself apart. And I see the United States of America collapsing along the same lines as the former Soviet Union. Out of money, hopelessly in debt, lost the trust and confidence and faith of their own people, exposed as a bunch of corrupt liars. They're not going to be able to hold the nation together. And I really do see that as coming. I don't know when it's going to happen because they keep changing the rules for their own benefit. But you're right. This can't go on the way it is. It's got a built-in self-destruct mechanism. We just need to stay calm, kick back, have a soda pop and some popcorn, and watch the show when it happens.
Yeah, but what happens then if that does happen? I mean, we're really a creek without a paddle then.
Well, there's going to be about 4 months where we're going to have to take care of ourselves and our friends and our neighbors while we form a new republic. But again, look at the modern Russian republics and how well they're doing and how good life is in that country compared to what it was under the Soviet Union. The United States is going to be the same way. It's going to come out of the other side of the collapse of the current government much better off for ordinary American people, and I look forward to seeing that. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news, and we will be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. We've got a caller waiting right now. Damien in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Happy Monday. How you doing?
Happy Monday.
Just following up on your last caller, and this is not anything personal or anything like that. I am just still surprised at people that are surprised at politicians because of decisions they make or what they do. This is always going to be like this. People have to get it into their head that you don't elect a politician and then sit on your hands and look at the TV and, nod your head back and forth and wait for them to vote the way you want them to vote. You have to use your democracy and call your representatives and tell them that you demand them to vote this way or that way on this piece of legislation or that piece of legislation.
It's good in theory. It's good in theory. Unfortunately, over time, our original constitutional system has become perverted to the point where most politicians don't do more than pay lip service to the voters. They're just taking huge amounts of money. They operate on the theory that whoever's got the most money is going to win the office, either through overwhelming advertising or outright theft of the elections. The biggest problem the United States is facing right now are these electronic voting machines that are wide open to manipulation. It's been well documented. There was a wonderful HBO documentary on it called Hacking Democracy. You've got Bev Harris and her wonderful website, blackboxvoting.org. There was the scandal over the Diebold electronic voting machines. And because of those, the American people are cut out from the political process. It's gone totally fascistic. The money buys what the money wants. Now, that being said, you need to understand all nations go through this life cycle where when they are created, generally the political structure is listening to the people because it's the people who created the government. Then over time, the government engineers that complacency. You voted me into office. You don't need to worry. Just go on about your job and I'll make sure everything works okay. Until it reaches a point where the government has to collapse or there has to be a revolution and the process starts all over again with a government that's going to pay attention to the people. I think a good example of that would be the French Revolution, which we tend to express as a singular, except it wasn't. It was multiple revolutions in rapid succession, from 1793 all the way through, I think, until 1808. And a lot of it was inspired by what had happened here in the United States of America. But each new incoming revolutionary government started thinking, well, we can live high on the hog the way our predecessors did, and then the people would come in and kick them out again. And finally, after all these different revolutions, the people of France got a government that was very aware that their primary job was to make the people of France happy, or they were going to get their own turn at the guillotine. And for about half a century after the French Revolution, the people of France had a government that respected them, cared for them, took care of them. Same thing in the United States of America. The brand new government in Washington, D.C. Was very aware that their time in office was dependent on the American people. But almost at once, the corrupting influences started to work. You had the private central bankers through Alexander Hamilton working to get the first bank of the United States. Then when that one was shut down, triggering the War of 1812, there was the second bank of the United States. It's always an ongoing process. But we need to be ready. When this current system comes crashing down, which seems inevitable, we have to be ready to stand up as a united American people and say, we will decide what the next government of this country will be. We're working on a blueprint for the new America. It's going to contain a lot of what was in the original Constitution. It is certainly not going to allow any more private central banking, and it's going to go back to the original Founding Fathers' ideal of power and authority diffuse across the nation, the states, the counties, the people, and the central government deliberately hamstrung and chained down to avoid the kind of mischief we're seeing now.
Yeah. Mike, do you talk about, I'm sure you have, but FDR's second Bill of Rights, and then after, FDR died before he could see this through in the United States, but correct me if I'm wrong, weren't his staff given the task to rebuild those nations, and did they not institute that? And isn't that why countries like Japan and Germany did thrive very well, because of the institutions that they helped to put forth, which were his doctrine he had hoped to put forth in the United States. Am I wrong in that?
Yeah, you're close to what's going on here. I mean, all politicians like to talk about rewriting the Constitution or the Bill of Rights either as a power grab or just as an exercise in vanity. I'm the equivalent of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson because I think it ought to be this way. And we're seeing a lot of that now come out in the debate over the Second Amendment. We'll tell you what it means. The Supreme Court was wrong. It should be this, and you should just go along with us because we're liberal ideologues and nobody should ever question us. But in terms of the U.S. policy behind following World War II, and it's basically the same following every war, nation building is a polite euphemism for the U.S. going in and re-engineering a nation to be of service to the American corporations. And both with Germany and Japan, they went in, did a lot of rebuilding, and both of those nations became economic vassal states to the emerging American empire. Those nations that wouldn't go along with that were targeted for covert overthrow and re-engineering. And that's what nation building really means, is making something useful out of all the debris.
Yeah. Just really briefly off topic, I'm not sure if you saw the email that Helen Caldicott, the video, it's a little bit more recent. She talks about more current information as far as Fukushima. And I was wondering, have you had her on your show before?
Boy, the name rings a bell. I haven't had her on the show recently. I'd have to go back and look through the records of who I have had on the show. I certainly know who she is, and we'll look at that. I mean, Fukushima has to be an issue. In fact, if you remember on the SRN news break at the top of the show, they were talking about how all these salmon are dying off. Oh, but it's obviously the problem is warming water from human-caused global warming. And just like Israel's nuclear weapons, nobody is allowed to talk about all the radiation pouring into the Pacific Ocean from the ruins of Fukushima.
Yeah. She goes into detail about about a lot of things. If you can check out the email that I sent, it's a pretty current video, and it's definitely worth a watch.
Well, I'll take a look at it, and we might want to rush on that because the latest word I have now is the entire Fukushima reactor site is now starting to sink. Apparently, the subterranean structure has either been melted or washed out with water, and there are voids and sinkholes opening up, and the entire thing could. Yeah,
it was just poorly built from the start, and it's crazy. Mike, thanks so much for taking my call.
All right, you got it. We're going to let you go here. There were shortcuts in the construction of Fukushima. What we're seeing now, though, is definitely the result of the meltdowns and the flood of water put in there to try and cool it off, and it is a disaster, and there's nothing they can do about it. All right, getting on back to politics and corruption. Over in Great Britain, Lord Sewell is in serious trouble. Apparently, a video surfaced of him cavorting with two sex workers at his central London flat behind the back of his third wife. Apparently, he was chugging champagne and vodka, using a 5-pound note to do lines of cocaine from a table and from the breasts of one of the sex workers, who's 45 years his junior. But a source insists that he is not going to quit, and he's going to go on claiming his 300-pound-a-day living allowance. Last word we have is that, yes, he's been convinced it's time for him to resign. He was the Deputy Speaker of the House of Lords. Yeah, this is the kind of people who seek these positions of power, wealth, and influence. And it's time for us to recognize they are mentally ill. That's why they seek these positions of power. That's why they behave the way they do, including the molesting of little tiny children. They're sick people. We will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. I got a lot of stuff to get through here. I'm probably going to have to take most of this into tomorrow's show. Now, as you know, there's a big stink over these videos that surfaced from Planned Parenthood, which exposed the fact that Planned Parenthood is taking the aborted babies and harvesting them for material for sale to labs and so forth. And it puts this whole organization in a very negative light. Now, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who's a Democrat up in New York, has sent out a fundraising email just attacking anybody who would question Planned Parenthood and denouncing it as an attack on women's health choices. Kirsten, this is not about women's health choices. This is about Planned Parenthood making a fast buck selling the bits and pieces of these aborted babies. And an absolute complete disregard and lack of respect for the fact that these were going to be human beings at some point. And I know the pro-abortion party likes to say, oh, it's just a blob of protoplasm. It's not a real human being until it pops out, and then it's a real human being, and it can't be a human being before that, which is nonsense. And this Kirsten is out there. She's pushing the feminist angle, which is what Hillary is counting on to put her over the top, the so-called vagina vote. And by the way, that's her campaign saying that. That's phrase they're using, the vagina vote. And so Kirsten Gillibrand is out there saying, if we had more women leading in Washington, we would not be dealing with the right wing's efforts to trample women's health care. And again, that's not the issue. The issue is the ghoulish and callous behavior of Planned Parenthood with the remains of these aborted fetuses. Now, Planned Parenthood has launched a counter-propaganda campaign insisting the videotapes were edited out of context. There's really no scandal there, that if you watch the entire videotapes, you would see this is all very innocent. Well, Fox News actually played the unedited tapes, and it's still in there. Planned Parenthood is encouraging women's abortions and then taking the pieces and selling them. And it does look very ghoulish, and it does come across as very negative. And this has got nothing to do with women's health issue or right to choose. It has to do with a very pronounced attitude that the unborn are not human. They're Untermenschen. They're not worthy of consideration. And if they're doing it to the unborn, it's only a matter of time before they do it to those of us who've actually made it into the world. Mark Dice, who likes to go on out and prove how incredibly stupid Americans are, is out there with another video. And he's out there telling people about it's time for a male privilege tax. And of course it's a goof and it's a joke, but he's out there saying that because men enjoy advantages over women in society, that men's income should be taxed at a greater level than women's. And he's unfortunately getting a lot of women to agree to that. And this is more divide and conquer tactics going into the election year. Hillary right now is desperate to convince all of the women in America that they are oppressed by the evil male patriarchy and that they'll just vote her into the White House, that she will make women reign supreme over our culture. They're not interested in equality anymore. They want a reversal. In fact, I think a good illustration of that, let me find it myself. Here it is, okay? This is a story that came out of BNP.org in Great Britain, where they're celebrating the launch of the world's first non-white modeling agency. And they're calling it a true celebration of diversity. Now, can you see the through the looking glass logic here? This is a modeling agency that discriminates against whites, and they're proclaiming it a celebration of diversity. Because in their mind, the way that you cure discrimination is you come back with more discrimination. That's how they're thinking about this. They want equality by saying white males not allowed. That's going to be it. Now, over in Sweden, their third largest city has been hit by multiple explosions. This is the city of Malmö. Police are sounding alarm over the increasing violence. Apparently, this is all tangled in with their large and growing migrant population. Let's hear it for open borders and how wonderful that is. Over in Germany, a pro-immigrant German politician's car was targeted for an explosion. People are getting very upset about this stuff. Now, here's a statistic, and I know it's going to be hard. A couple of them. First of all, the illegal immigrant population of the United States of America is above 11 million. 11 million people who are here illegally. That's more than the officially claimed unemployment number of legal Americans, which is around 9 million. We know it's actually 10 times that, but that's what the government is saying here. It has now been estimated, this is a story coming out of Newskick 90, right now 1/5 of the population of El Salvador and 1/4 of the population of Mexico are now living here in the United States of America. They're still citizens of El Salvador. They're still citizens of Mexico. They are earning money here under the table and sending it back down to their families in these other countries. It's not being spent into the U.S. economy. And this is the result of this open borders policy. Now, more green cards have been issued to immigrants this year than the entire population of the original 13 colonies of the United States of America. That's how out of control it is. So let's get on down to guns and drugs and shooting. There's an article over here in Global Research. Are psychotropic drugs involved in the latest Lafayette, Louisiana shootings? Yes, they were. This guy was off and on medications. His family is saying it was hard keeping him on the medications, and we know that when you come off these SSRIs is when you are most vulnerable to having an unpredictable episode of violence or suicide. It is absolutely established. Now, there's a new website out. I talk about SSRIstories.org. There's a new one called PsychdrugShooters.com. It has a searchable database of all of these crimes, mass shootings, suicides, indexed by whatever drugs these perpetrators were on. There is clearly a correlation here. But nobody wants to deal with it because prescription psychiatric medications are big business in this country, and they're very generous campaign donors. Congress actually looked at the issue, refused to do anything about it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and just trying to stay up on top of all this nonsense that's coming in here. All right, let's talk about gun control, because every time there's another one of these shootings, the gun grabbers come out and say, it's the guns are bad, we got to get rid of the guns. If we get rid of the guns, everything will be just fine. Which history has shown, when you ban guns for the law-abiding citizens, the criminals still have guns and they run rampant, crime goes up. But the gun grabbers aren't concerned about crime in the streets. They're concerned about guns in the hands of an angry people who are just ticked off at the way they're being abused. Now, Obama has pledged to use his last 18 months in office pushing for gun control. We've got to take the guns away. And there's a very illustrative article over in IntelliHub where the liberal media is out there openly calling for mass gun confiscation in America. You have no reason to have a gun, because we don't want to be afraid of you as we abuse your lives even more than we already have. And this article goes in basically talking about how the liberal agenda is out there saying the Second Amendment only applies to a militia, and that is how they write it in Common Core, by the way. If you have a kid who's in school, look at the Common Core textbooks. They have rewritten the Bill of Rights to change its meaning. Now, the Supreme Court ruled in 2008. All of the rights in the Bill of Rights are applied to individuals, and the Second Amendment is no exception. The militia exists in two forms under the law. The organized militia is the National Guard. The unorganized militia is everybody else able to keep and handle a weapon. But these gun-grabbing fanatics are trying to figure out some way they can convince us that we don't need to have guns out here. I was pointing out on one of these debates the other day about, far more people are killed by drunk drivers. Nobody talks about banning cars. Medical mistakes kill 400,000 Americans, and every year nobody talks about banning doctors or even getting them under control. More people are killed with baseball bats than assault rifles. Nobody talks about banning baseball. And the inevitable counter-argument is, cars and doctors and baseball, they perform useful functions. There is nothing you can use a gun for legitimately. Well, they're wrong there. You can use a gun to put food on the table, which I have done in my youth. You can use a gun to scare a criminal out of your home, which I have done. And you can use a gun to put holes in paper targets for fun, which I have done. You don't get to decide what is legitimate or illegitimate for me. If I'm not harming any other citizen, it is none of your business, and that's in the Fourth Amendment. Now, the gun grabbers are out there saying, well, the more guns you have, the more gun crime you're going to have. Right now, the United States does have the highest rate of gun ownership in the world. 90 firearms for every 100 residents. I don't know if that includes the illegals or not, but that's the number. But we're not the world's murder capital. Honduras is, and they've got strict gun control. Ooh, very hard to get a gun there. Unless you're a criminal, then of course they're, unloading them from the smugglers' boats left and right. What the gun grabbers are afraid of is not crime in the streets. They're afraid of an armed and angry populace coming in to fire them for not doing the job the Constitution says they're supposed to do. Now, over in Alabama, common sense has finally prevailed. The governor just ordered the taking down of all these gun-free zone signs that the Alabama Department of Transportation had put up on all of the rest stops. Ooh, this is a gun-free zone, which we know is where the nutcases whose brains are melting down on pharmaceuticals go to have their giant open-air shooting gallery. Hey, gun-free zone, nobody can fire back at me. MSNBC ran a poll. 90% of the respondents say, yes, guns are good. We have a legitimate right to own guns, and Obama has no right to take them away unless we have committed some kind of a crime with them. Now, over in Columbus, Ohio, they've been running a program called Gun Stoppers. It's a partnership run by the city and Crime Stoppers. We've got the Gun Stoppers program. It's well-funded with tax money and private donations. So far, hasn't actually collected a gun. But it looks good in the newspapers. Looks good on the campaign literature. And it looks like we may have had another attempt for one of these false flag incidents to justify a gun ban. Over in Cincinnati, 62-year-old man had a gun in each hand, started firing at 4 people, including a 1-year-old boy. Fortunately, there was a civilian with a concealed carry permit. Shot and wounded the perpetrator. He's the only one who got hurt. You're not going to hear about this on the corporate media. Oh, we don't have enough dead bodies on this thing. And it looks like this was another attempt at one of these false flags. And have you noticed, ever since Obama talked about banning guns for Social Security recipients, they're using really old patsies in these hoaxes? This guy was 62, the guy in Chattanooga in his late 50s. And you're not going to see this story on the corporate media. They don't want any stories where a citizen with a legally owned firearm stops a crime in progress. What they want are bloody shirts. We need more bloody shirts to convince Americans that they should give up their guns and trust to the police to protect them from crime, which we know is a joke. The police never stop crime in progress. They'll show up after the crime is over, 20, 30 minutes on average, after the 911 call. And they'll pose with the dead bodies for the newspaper photographers, and that will be it. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Stephen in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Michael. I just wanted to thank you. And also, after your talk about the guy, I think, in Lafayette, I punched in HIPAA laws after death and came up with you can't get medical records for 50 years.
Yeah, that's been a new thing here because in all these other mass shootings, we were talking about how these people were on medications, and then all of a sudden we saw all these laws saying that medical records are considered private, even for people who are no longer alive, and you know, you don't need to know what medications are going on. I think one of the most revealing videotapes came out of Connecticut after Sandy Hook, where there was this group that was using the state's equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit to find out what medications Adam Lanza was on when he did whatever it is he was supposed to have done. And there was a gentleman in the hearing, Patrick Quanashe, who was an attorney for the state medical examiner's office, who insisted that even if the psychiatric medications had been a cause of the violence in this one case, it wasn't something the general public needed to know because it would discourage them from taking their medication. Well, Patrick was wrong on one point. It's not this one case. Better than 90% of all these mass shooters involve people either on or withdrawing from these medications. And what Patrick is thinking about is just how dependent the state of Connecticut is on big pharmaceutical corporations. And if a few people get killed because the medications aren't perfect, well, that's a small price to pay for keeping our tax base intact. And that's exactly what these people are thinking about. It's okay if some of you get killed by the medications, if some of you get shot down by somebody whose brain is melted on the medications. It's a small amount. We're still making profits and generating tax revenue, and that's all that's important in the modern United States of America.
I agree totally, Michael.
Okay, I mean, that's literally what it is. Our entire nation, from top to bottom, is so much in debt that getting money is the only priority anybody has. Like, look at that guy they just sentenced to 45 years. A doctor was telling healthy patients they had cancer so he could sell them chemotherapy. Permanently crippled their lives. But it was making money. Why are you arguing? It was making money. That's all that matters. Thank you for the call, Stephen. We got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today, and I had a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to pick one story to finish the show with, and it has to do with this epidemic of police brutality, because what we are seeing from the status now is this latest campaign where if you obey the law, you have nothing to fear from the police. That's it. Don't complain. The only ones being hurt by the cops are those who break the law. And that is complete and utter nonsense. By the way, we have a video linked to WhatReallyHappened.com having to do with the young woman who was arrested by the officer for failing to signal and wound up dead of hanging in the cell 3 days later, and they're claiming it was a suicide. And the officer was making these claims about how she was assaulting him, she was using profanity, and the original tape put out had been edited. The unedited tape has been released or leaked, and it completely shows the arresting officer lying through his teeth to justify what he did. So getting on back to this idea, if you have not committed a crime, you have nothing to fear from the police. And this is an article that came out of the Free Thought Project, and just going on down the list here. Jonathan Sanders broke no law before he was chased down by a Mississippi cop who threw him on the ground and strangled him to death in front of family members. Esmeralda Rossi was getting into the shower in Arizona when two cops illegally entered her home, ripped the towel off, assaulted and arrested her completely naked. Esmeralda Rossi had not broken any law whatsoever. Eric Wilson, on his way home from his job at Lighthouse for the Blind, stopped by two Little Rock police officers alleging he fit the description of a suspect. The fact that Wilson is legally blind did not stop these officers from assaulting this man who couldn't even see them. Dylan Taylor walked out of a convenience store after purchasing a drink. Police mistook him for a suspect. Taylor was wearing headphones. Music headphones, did not hear the officer's commands to stop. The officer then shot and murdered this innocent man. Dylan Taylor did not commit a crime. He was just minding his own business, walking out of a store, music in his ears, like so many of us does, shot in the back. Daniel Chong, kidnapped by police and held in a pitch-black cell for 5 days without food or water. He had broken no law, and the officers who nearly killed him said that, well, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Of course we're going to beat the crud out of him. Floyd Dent, a retired grandfather, pulled over by police who alleged he was a drug dealer. He was pulled out of his car and severely beaten on the side of the road by multiple cops. Video evidence later showed that he was innocent and showed a police officer trying to plant drugs on his vehicle. Antonio Martinez was 22 years old, brutally attacked, pepper-sprayed, and arrested by Officer Jeffrey Guy. Martinez has Down's syndrome, the mental capacity of a 7-year-old, committed no crime. The sheriff's department tried to make up with the family by giving them a frozen turkey. Surashbhai Patel was left paralyzed permanently after Officer Eric Parker brutalized the 57-year-old grandfather, was in America to visit his kids. Again, no crime was committed. Parker Mansell Jr. is in a wheelchair due to health complications. Police came to his house to serve a warrant on his son. They tased this guy in his wheelchair, who was not a threat. Dustin Theo Harris was asleep in his bed. Two cops busted into his bedroom, began to unload their pistols on this unarmed man. They fired 20 rounds, 16 of which hit this guy, who was not the man they were looking for, and again, he'd committed no crime. And the list goes on and on and on. All of these people, up to and including this horrible incident down in Georgia, where the police did a SWAT team raid on a house and threw a flashbang grenade into this baby's crib, permanently disfiguring him. Now, there's a little smidgen of justice there. The federal government has indicted a deputy sheriff at Habersham County, Georgia, Nikki Autry, because she presented a search warrant affidavit to the magistrate judge based on false evidence. She swore under oath that a known confidential informant had been reliable in the past, had purchased drugs from an individual standing in front of the house. And based on that information, the judge issued the no-knock, kick-down-the-door, flashbang-a-baby warrant. And by the way, no drugs were found on the premises. So this idea that if you obey the law and don't do anything wrong, that you don't have to worry about the police, it's nonsense. Remember the shootout at the Empire State Building? 9 bystanders shot, all by the cops. By the way, you know that woman who won the $188 million Powerball lottery? Police raided her house based on her son's prior record for drug possession and found drugs on the premises. And I'm sure the fact that the police could then take the $188 million in a civil forfeiture case was never, ever, 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 ever a factor in choosing that particular time to enter that particular house. Up in Portland, Officer Jeremy Palaoro is on paid leave, paid administrative leave. He was one of the officers who responded to a call by a woman who claimed her boyfriend had attacked her. And the officers came and took the boyfriend away. But apparently the officer, Palaoro, came back the next morning in his civilian clothes but carrying a gun and proceeded to assault this woman for 7 hours. Native American activist found dead in jail cell after a traffic fine arrest. Rexdale W. Henry, 53 years old, was arrested for a traffic fine issue, and the State Crime Lab is doing an autopsy, looking into the case, and what they're going to do is the same thing they did with Sandra Bland. Oh, absolutely the injuries are consistent with suicide, because Sandra Bland was found hanging in her cell, and she shows the signs of hanging. Therefore, it must be a suicide. And as we mentioned, the video, the full unedited video of Sandra Bland's arrest is at WhatReallyHappened.com. The arresting officer was lying to cover his brutalization of this woman. So this idea that we have nothing to fear from the police departments, as long as we obey the law, is nonsense, because we're dealing with a police force which is itself in violation of the law. That's the problem. Now, there was a big protest in New Jersey highlighting police brutality in response to Sandra Bland's strange suicide. Apparently, there were some clashes between the police and the demonstrators as well. Now, meanwhile, Spain is moving forward as a party to the United Nations Convention Against Torture, saying it is time for the U.S. government to be held to account for the fact that they have been using torture. Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, all of these CIA secret sites, Diego Garcia. Remember, the United States government tortured innocent Iraqis to death to find weapons of mass destruction which did not exist. And the top planners in the government knew all along those nuclear weapons did not exist. It was just the excuse for an invasion for economic purposes. And they're right. No nation should be above the law. Not Israel, not the United States. And everybody involved in the torturing of prisoners needs to be brought to trial. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I got to do Jim Goddard's show up in Vancouver next, and then run out and do errands with my lady love. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, share what you know with everyone that you know. Call your local talk radio station. Point them at GCNlive.com. Have a good day. Aloha, America.